Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. Today's project is a little bit different, but it's still a bag. All you need are 4 squares of fabric. It's a perfect one for layer cakes if you've got those 10-inch layer cake squares, charm squares, which are about 5 inches. So you can make it in any size at all, no matter what size fabric you have, you'll be able to do this. Come along and we'll make this together. We don't need much at all for this project. I've got 2 strips of fabric that are 3 inches by 2 inches. These are going to be for the tabs at the end of the bag, not for the zip. So we fold them in half, bring the raw edges in together and then fold that in half and set those aside. I have a zip that is 30 centimetres or 12 inches. And then I have 4 pieces of fabric that are 10-inch squares. Now, you can make these in any size you like. This one here being 10 inches is perfect for use with layer cakes. If you've got any, you can even use your 5-inch charm squares. The zip size will be determined by the size of these squares that you've got. So I want my zip to be longer than the square. So whatever you have in the fabric, make your zip a little bit longer than that. I have 2 10-inch squares for the outside of the bag. So this is the top section and this will be the underside of the bag. And then I've got 2 pieces of lining that are also 10 inches. I would have liked both my lining pieces to be the same, but I didn't have quite enough fabric for both pieces. This one I felt was a little bit wishy-washy to have on the outside. So 2 for the lining and 2 for the outside. For the main fabric, we also want to fuse some lightweight Pellin. It's just a very lightweight fusible product. It's very thin. We just want a little bit of structure, and they will be 9.5 inches. Whatever size you cut your squares at, your Pellin will be 1/2 inch shorter. That will allow for your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if you use a 5-inch square, your Pellin will be 4.5 inches. If you use an 8-inch square, your Pellin will be 7.5 inches. Very simple formula. Let's get started. The first thing we want to do is put a zip in. Work out which piece is your main fabric. We're going to cut that in half, straight down the centre. So I know that this is a 10-inch piece. I'm going to make a 5-inch cut and just make sure you've got your Pellin fused to that as well. So there's that piece cut in half. And then we want a lining piece cut in half as well. So choose whichever one you like. We'll cut that piece of lining at the same size. And this lining piece doesn't have anything fused to it. I've got 1 outer and 1 inner still left. We'll set that aside. Now we need to insert the zip. Although I've left a 1/4 inch seam allowance on the outside edges, I haven't left one on the zip because we've just cut that in half. It's not going to add that much extra bulk. Place your fabric right side up, take your zip, and we'll place that face down across that piece of fabric. So you want the slider to be faced down, and then take your lining piece and place that right sides together directly over the top, and we can take that to the machine and stitch it in place. When we take this to the machine, have your lining piece on the underneath and the piece that's got the fusible Pellin on the top, and we'll sew all the way down. Once we've done that, we'll open it out and we're going to top stitch all the layers together. So you'll bring the lining and the main together, separate it from the zip, press it down and sew a 1/8 inch top stitch. Okay, here we go. Feel the bump in the zip underneath, and you just want to sew really close to that. If you have a zipper foot, that'll make the job easier. Backstitch at the beginning and the end. Once you've finished that row, open your fabric out, push both pieces of fabric away from the zipper tape, flatten that down, and then you want to go and do a 1/8 inch top stitch I'm too lazy to change my thread, so I'm going to use the bright yellow thread. I think it'll be a really nice contrast and it'll tie in with the underside of the fabric. We don't want to start at the very top edge of the fabric here. It'll make it a bit difficult to manipulate the corners when we're sewing around the bag. As our seam allowance is 1/4 of an inch, we're going to start 1/2 an inch from the end of the fabric, backstitch at the beginning and at the end, and we'll stop 1/2 an inch from the end as well. So that looks nice with that yellow contrast, doesn't it? I think one of my squares was cut a little bit big, but we'll be trimming this back after as well, so it won't matter. Next, we're going to take our other piece of main fabric and we'll place that over the top of the zip, or the other way around. I've got the fusible all the way to the end here. We'll take that as the top and we'll place this piece over the top and we'll line up those side seams and the top edge as well. Double check that that's lined up. We'll grab our other piece, the lining piece, place that right side down and line that up as well and clip it together. We'll take this back to the machine. We'll sew that in place as well. Then we'll open it out and top stitch just like we did with the first side. So we'll do exactly the same that we did with the other side of the zip. Open the fabric out, press it down away from the centre of the zip there, and same with the lining. Have them both sitting nice and flat. We'll do the same thing again. We'll top stitch 1/2 an inch in from the outside edge. So I'm really liking the way that looks. I love that yellow contrast thread on the top there. Set that aside for a moment. Take your little tabs. So what we've done is folded the raw edges in. We've got 3 inches across there and 2 inches across here. So we're just going to fold the raw edges in and then fold that in half again. You'll have your 3-inch strip. I'll take these both to the machine quickly and sew straight down both long edges. Okay, the little tabs are done. Before I put the tabs on, I just want to trim my zips back because I also want to square up my fabric. Open out the zip. So you want to make sure the slider is within your square. And then we want to go and sew the zip down just on the very edge here. So you want to sew on the inside section of the black square, not on the outside, because we're about to trim that. I'll quickly take this to the machine and just do a couple of stitches on the zipper tape. If you're concerned about the tape moving, grab some adhesive tape, place that over the layers. That'll help keep the teeth together and then you can just stitch straight over them. I'll go and do that right now. So there's the zip closed at the very end there, and you can remove that tape and be confident knowing that the zip isn't going to come off the edge. It'll stop where you've sewn the end there. Now that's a step you don't have to do if you don't want to, because in the next step it's going to be done anyway, but some people do like to keep their zipper ends together. For this project, we need to make sure our back and front pieces and our linings are exactly the same size because we're going to be pivoting at corners. So I need to make sure that my fabric is exactly the same size for every piece. You can see that my lining fabric is sticking out a little bit. I don't think I cut that properly to begin with. I'm going to square this up so that it's a perfect square, and I'll make sure all of the layers are the same size. So I'll place all of the layers together. You can see the bright yellow is sticking out a little bit as well. And that's because of the size of the zipper tape. So if you're using a number 3 or a number 5, and it also depends on the seam allowance that you've got in here for your zip. So it'll be much easier just to square it all up, make sure everything is the same size on all 4 sides. And we'll cut the zipper tape off at the same time. I can cut through 4 layers of this because I'm using a really sharp blade in my cutter. It makes the job a lot easier and safer too. My squares are now at 9.5 inches. Now we can put our side tabs on. So just take your tab, fold it in half, place it right on the very edge of your zip there, and we'll do the same on the other side. You can let it hang out a little bit if you like, but I'm only going to cut it off if I do that, so there's no point. And I will sew these tabs in place. Normally I will do that at the machine when I'm putting all my layers together. Because we're going to be manipulating fabric around corners in a minute, it's easier to sew these tabs in place, then you don't have to worry about them shifting. I'll quickly put those on now. Okay, the little tabs are in place, and now the most important thing we need to do, which I forget all the time, is open your zip. We need to put the bag together now, and there's a simple way to do it or a really complicated way to do this, and I think I'm going to stick with simple. If I complicate things, we'll have a beautiful lining on the inside, but it's going to be so fiddly to try and work out. So I'm going to cheat. We're going to have it lined, but we're going to have raw edges on the inside. So if you have a serger or an overlocker, you can finish up the raw edges on the inside. I think this way that we're going to do it is much easier to follow. So at the moment we have our lining connected to the main fabric, and we want to keep all of these layers together. So clips or pins are going to get in the way. And to prevent the layers from shifting as we're sewing, I'm going to run some double-sided tape just along the long edge, and I'll tape the two pieces of fabric together so they don't shift, and I'll do that on this edge and the other one. So I'll remove that paper, and that's nice and flat. Then we don't have those pins distorting our work, and we won't prick ourselves either. The double-sided tape that I'm using is specific for sewing, so it doesn't gum up your needles. It's a wash away tape as well, so if you washed your product, if you're doing dressmaking and inserting zips, it'll wash out. It doesn't gum up your needles, there's no sticky residue at all. I've been using this for years and not had any problems. So the difference between that and craft tape, when you use craft tape, that's usually where you have problems with needles coming up. So that's in position now. We'll take our back piece and we'll take our lining piece and place those wrong sides together. So if this had a print on it, I'd have the print up and out. I'm going to do the same thing. This one I'll probably do all four sides. The tape is repositionable as well. If it doesn't line up the way you like, you can just lift your fabric and reposition it. Okay, we've got our front and our back. What we need to do now is mark 1/4 of an inch point on each of the pieces of fabric. We're just going to mark a dot, and that will be the position that our needle stops at when we pivot our work. So I've marked 4 dots in the corners there. This is the lining side, and we'll do the same for this one. You also want to find the exact center of all of the fabric pieces as well. So fold that in half. Make a mark on that fold. We'll do that on the other side as well. Then fold the other side in half. So you can see I've got 3 positions marked on the outside edges of the fabric here. And these are our pivot points. And they all need to be 1/4 of an inch in from the outside edge. Repeat that for this one here. And you don't really need to mark the centre of the zip because we know where that is when we get to it. Now we take our main fabric, have that right side up, take our back piece with the lining attached to it, and have the pallin side, the side that's got the fusible wadding on it, faced down. We're going to line up this pivot point here with the centre of our zip. So I've popped a pin in there, and this is where we start sewing, on the very edge of the zip, 1/4 inch in, and we're going to place our fabric in line with the square that we've got. And where we've marked this point halfway across the fabric, that's where we're sewing to. So from here to here, we sew, then stop with the needle in the down position. So I've got a pin here and a pin here. Your needle will stop right there. Then what you're going to do is turn your work around and manipulate your fabric so that you can continue to sew along here. So you will then sew from that point to this point. You may need to trim the corner of your fabric as you get to it, so you may just want to trim into the corner here. We'll get to the machine and we'll assess that when we get there. When you're at your machine and your needle comes down in the fabric, it will come down exactly over that pivot point that you've got on the other side of your fabric. So let's take this to the machine now, and hopefully it'll all make sense. And you can see why I needed to tape the edges together. So the point of my fabric is lined up on the very edge of the fabric behind it. And where that spot is where I'm going to start with my needle. I'll put my needle into position before I start sewing. Then I'll raise the foot, turn the fabric around, and now I can do a forward and back, or stitch in place. And continue until that next dot. So I've stopped with my needle in the down position, raised my presser foot, grab the top layer of fabric and bring that under fabric around. It may be difficult to see, but the top fabric is curling over, and I should be able to just continue sewing. Yep. And I'm going to continue sewing until the next dot. Remembering to do a 1/4 inch seam all the way across. I've stopped at that dot, raise the foot, and we'll do the same again. Move that little corner fabric out of the way. If it's in the way and you can't get past it, you can just clip into it. Raise your foot. You'll continue to do this until you've done all 4 sides. Because I'm at the section where the zip is and there's a few layers, I'm going to backstitch here. Oops. The more corners you have, the more difficult it's going to be to manipulate your fabric. We're almost at the end of it. It's very fiddly, but it's actually a really nice little bag. Okay, we're on the last side now, and this is where we hope that everything is going to line up nicely. You may have noticed on the corners I've actually done 2 stitches forward and 2 stitches back, and then come into the corner before I've actually turned, and then I've done the same thing as I've started again. I've done forward and back just to secure those corners. All right, so here's our bag. Looks like it's exploded, doesn't it? It's a really cool design. What we can do now is clip our corners and the inner ones as well. Where that center fold is, you want to snip up to the stitching line but not through it, and we'll do that at every intersecting point. And we'll do that on both sides of the fabric. And you can clip your corners if you like, just to get rid of a little bit of excess. And you'll do that on both sides as well. Now at this point, if you want to neaten your edges and overlock them or serge them, you can go and do that on all of your raw edges. I don't really think it needs to, so I'm going to leave it as it is. The other option you might want to do is to top stitch the bag on the outside. Let's turn it the right way around and you can have a look and see how it's turned out. Poke out all your corners. And there is our finished bag. Kind of cool, isn't it? It's an interesting design. So it's come back into the square with the square base, the triangle sides, and then you can see the square top as well. Plenty of room on the inside of the bag. You really can't see the seams on the inside because they're going up and down on the sides. But again, if you want to tidy that up, you can go for it. You can go and top stitch along here, but I think there's too many layers and the bag looks nice and neat as it is. Once you start doing that row of top stitching, I think it's going to cause all sorts of problems. So I would leave it as it is. And here's its baby brother or sister. This one here was done with 5-inch squares, and this one here was done with the 10-inch squares. I've lined this, but this one here I haven't. So all I've done is used 2 outer pieces of fabric and put Palin on the inside there, and I haven't put any lining fabric on it at all. So I did feel that it needed the lining just to get away from the Palin here, because I think that would wear away after time. Now when we were putting the zip in, I did mention to top stitch 1/2 inch in from the outside edges. It actually doesn't matter for this project. When I was doing that, I had the intention of having a fully enclosed lining, but that was just going to be too difficult. If you're going to use this technique with the raw edges on the inside or even the serged edges, you can stitch straight across the entire piece of fabric. So that was a fun little project, wasn't it? It's certainly a very different little pouch. You've got your tabs on the end of the zips, and this one that I've done here is the smaller version made with 5-inch squares. And what I've done is I've put a little swivel clip on one side, so this one only has the one tab on it. You could easily hang this onto the side of your bag or a pram or anything you wanted to. Quick project, easy to do. It's a little bit fiddly when you get to the corners, but it's not difficult at all. You just got to hold your tongue the right way. Let me know if you're going to make it, and if you are, I'd love to see photos. We have a Facebook group. It's called Christine's Home Affairs, and everybody is welcome to share everything they make on that group. So I'd love to see what you make. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.